Vethrak Imperial Ground Forces, 3rd Assault Corps, 7th Rifle Company. After-action record, mandatory submission. Filing officer, Line Sergeant Dak Oravith, Badge 7 Chalk 14. Engagement reference, Ridgeline Thorn approaches to Firebase Crescent, Day 6 of the Thorn Offensive. Classification, command review required. Prefatory note. Command has requested this record be submitted in the standard format. It is being submitted in the standard format. The filing officer notes in this prefatory section that the standard format was not designed for what is described herein, and that personal annotations have been added where the standard format proved insufficient. This is a combat record. It is also a warning. The distinction may no longer matter. First contact Ridgeline Thorn, 340 local. Oravith's section of 9 personnel had been assigned forward reconnaissance of the draw below the western approach to Firebase Crescent. The coalition had established a thin picket line along the ridge. Intelligence assessed it as lightly held 4 to 6 combatants, rotation schedule unknown. They encountered one. He was a coalition scout, human male. Young Oravith estimated 22 standard years, though he was not experienced at reading human ages. The young man was carrying a long-pattern rifle and a sidearm. He was alone in the draw when Point Element Sergeant Vethrak identified him at a range of approximately 40 meters. The section had the advantage of numbers, position, and surprise. Vethrak's shot struck the human in the left shoulder. Oravith confirmed the hit through his own optic. The round was a 7.4 millimeter penetrator. At 40 meters against a target in light armor, it should have ended the engagement. The human dropped to his knee. He did not go down. He returned fire from the knee in the dark toward a muzzle flash he had located in approximately 0.8 seconds. His shot struck Private Eckel in the throat. Eckel was dead before Vethrak could fire a second round. Annotation. Oravith wants to be precise about the timeline because 14 years of contact reports have taught him how this will read. The human was shot, confirmed hit, and returned accurate fire in under 1 second. He was still on his knee when he fired. His shoulder was producing visible fluid loss at this point. The armor had not stopped the round. No explanation is offered. What happened is stated. The section moved to flank positions. Standard doctrine for a 9-to-1 engagement. The human retreated into the draw's lower depression and used the terrain. He used it better than they did. In the next 11 minutes, he killed 2 more of Oravith's personnel, Private Death at the left flank approach, and Corporal Sarith, who had moved to an elevated position to suppress. Sarith was an 11-year veteran of the Corps. The human located her through a rock formation that Vethrak doctrine treats as adequate cover. When the section established a coordinated 3-point suppression and moved both flanks simultaneously, the human withdrew. Not in panic, in sequence. He moved from cover to cover at intervals that suggested he had mapped the section's fire positions during the contact and was exiting along their blind angles. Oravith did not pursue. 6 personnel remained, 3 of them carrying minor injuries. The human had a penetrating shoulder wound and had been in sustained fire contact for 11 minutes. The initial report to command, filed at 3:52, reads, Single human combatant, confirmed wounded, 3 friendly KIA, target withdrew south. Recommend cordon. Annotation. Oravith did not include in that initial report that the human, as he withdrew, was not moving with the gait of a wounded individual. He did not include it because he did not know how to categorize it, and he was not yet ready to report something he could not explain. He also did not include that Vethrak, a steady soldier with 9 years of service, a man who does not shake, had his hands shaking when Oravith reached him after the withdrawal. Vethrak said nothing about it. Oravith said nothing either. There is no category in the forms for that. Second contact, Ridgeline Thorn, 5:11 local. The second contact occurred at the southern base of the draw, 91 minutes after the first. Command had moved a reinforcement element, 12 additional personnel under Lieutenant Gaveth, to seal the southern approach, based on the withdrawal report. When the human arrived at the southern base, he arrived at the reinforcement element's position, not at a gap in the line. He killed Lieutenant Gaveth at the opening of the contact. Single shot, distance approximately 60 meters, through what the section's own combat engineers later confirmed was a layered rock formation that Vethrak optical targeting software categorizes as non-permeable. The round found a gap that the software had not. Annotation. This is stated clearly because it will be challenged. The human, alone, wounded, having withdrawn from a 9-person contact 90 minutes earlier, arrived at a 12-person reinforcement position and opened the engagement by eliminating the command element with a shot through cover that Vethrak targeting systems would not have attempted. He then engaged the remaining 11 personnel from a position that kept 3 exit routes in his fire arc simultaneously. He killed 4 more before the section broke contact. One of the survivors, Private First-Rate Alvin, 3 years of service, was found sitting against a supply crate at the consolidation point with his rifle across his knees and his eyes fixed on the draw. Alvin was uninjured. He had simply stopped moving. The section medic assessed him as combat effective. He filed no further reports for the remainder of Day 6, and when asked direct questions he answered in single words. Oreveth notes this, because it was not the only time he observed that response in otherwise uninjured personnel during the events of that day. At this point the engagement record showed 7 Vethrak personnel dead, 4 wounded, across 2 contacts. 1 human combatant, carrying what the medic later assessed from the blood trail analysis as a shoulder wound that had by then been active for 90 minutes. Oreveth had filed engagement records for 14 years. He had never filed a record where the math looked like this. The report to command at 5:23 requested an assessment uplift and asked whether the section was facing a single combatant or a small unit element that intelligence had miscounted. Command confirmed. Single combatant. The Firebase Crescent sensor net was tracking 1 thermal signature. 1. Annotation. Lieutenant Gaveth's section had a medic specialist, Oveth, who survived the second contact. Oveth found the blood trail during the consolidation sweep. She tracked it for approximately 20 meters before it disappeared. The human had applied field dressing to the shoulder wound while withdrawing from the second contact, in the dark, between positions, without pausing long enough to leave a pooling pattern. Oveth reported this to Oreveth in a flat voice while staring at the ground. He did not know what to say to her. Third contact, Ridgeline Thorn, 6:47 local. By the time of the third contact, the remaining element had been consolidated with the reinforcement survivors and a second relief section, bringing the total to 14 personnel. Command had repositioned 2 crew-served weapons to cover the draw approaches. A layered defensive position had been established. They were waiting. The human came up the eastern face of the ridge. The eastern face had not been in the threat assessment because it was assessed as non-viable, a 60-degree slope over loose scree and crumbled rock. No cover, no approach path. The section's mapping system rated it as impassable for a bipedal combatant under field conditions. He came up it anyway. Observation post Wren picked him up at the ridge lip at 6:47. He was moving slowly, the shoulder wound had stiffened, and the eastern approach had added visible damage to his lower legs and hands from the climb. He carried his rifle on his good side. He was not attempting concealment. He walked over the ridge lip and into the fire position of the 2 crew-served emplacements like a man who had already decided the conversation was going to happen and was choosing where to have it. Oreveth was at the forward command position. He watched it happen. For approximately 4 seconds, the crews of both emplacements did not fire. 14 armed personnel and 2 crew-served weapons, and there was a 4-second delay in which nobody fired at a man walking toward them. Oravith had thought about why, in the hours since. He believed it was because the human was not moving the way a threat moves. He was not charging. He was not running. He was walking toward 14 weapons in the manner of someone who had already concluded something and had arrived to make it final. There is a concept in Vethrak military doctrine called the cessation point, the moment at which a combatant's effective capability terminates. It is a threshold concept. Every engagement model the Vethrak use is built around it. For those 4 seconds, watching him cross that ridge, Oravith believed every one of them was processing the same terrible information. They did not know where this human cessation point was, or whether one existed at all. Section Leader Sergeant First-Rate Merak gave the fire order. The crew-served weapons opened. The human went down. He went down behind a low rock shelf. He had moved to it in the same instant Merak called the order, which was either extraordinary reaction or fortune, and Oravith was no longer willing to distinguish between those two things when applied to this individual. From behind the shelf, the human resumed fire. He killed Merak. He wounded 2 more. The engagement lasted an additional 9 minutes before he ceased fire. Annotation: a detail from that 9-minute exchange was omitted from the initial field report, because at the time Oravith was managing casualties and the detail seemed secondary. It no longer seems secondary. At approximately the 6-minute mark, one of the crew-served operators, Gunner Preth, rated expert class for 3 consecutive evaluation cycles, ceased firing and reported that he could not maintain his target arc. He could not determine where the human was between shots. The draw below the eastern approach is not large. There was 1 combatant in it, wounded, behind a rock shelf measuring approximately 2 meters in length. Preth is not an inexperienced gunner. He had lost the human's position between volleys and could not relocate him. When Oravith asked Preth afterward what he meant, specifically, Preth said the human was not moving the way things in his experience moved. He moved the way a gap in the terrain moves. Oravith wrote it down exactly as Preth said it, because he believed it was the most accurate description offered by any of his personnel across all 3 contacts. The human was not dead. He had withdrawn back over the eastern ridge lip, back down the face he had climbed. Observation post Ren tracked the thermal signature to the base of the approach and then lost it in the lower draw. The base of the lower draw was where the second contact had occurred. He had returned to the site of the second contact. Oravith stood at the forward command position for a long time after Ren's report came in, looking out over the draw in the gray early light. The ridgeline was quiet. The morning had cost 11 of the personnel under his command. Somewhere in that draw, a single thermal signature was moving, and it was not moving the way a dying thing moves. He became aware at some point that Thervak was standing beside him. The point element sergeant had a bandage on his left forearm from a ricochet taken in the 3rd contact. His hands were not shaking now. They were very still. That seemed to Oravith somehow worse. "Do you think he is going to come back?" Thervak asked. Oravith considered the question. He looked at the draw. He thought about the way the human had walked over that ridge lip in the pre-dawn, gray rifle on his good shoulder, not running, not hiding, simply arriving as though the outcome had already been settled, and all that remained was the formality of presence. He thought about the eastern face, and what it would take to climb it with a penetrating shoulder wound after 3 hours of sustained combat. He thought about Preth, who had lost a single wounded man behind a 2-meter rock shelf and could not explain how. "I think he went back to collect his dead," Oravith said quietly. "If his people left any in the draw during the first contact." Thervak was silent. "That is what he is doing in the middle of all of this." Oravith had no answer that fit inside the standard format. He filed the final consolidation report at 7:41. Firebase Crescent sensor net lost the thermal signature at 7:22. The signature had not terminated in any pattern consistent with a casualty event. It had simply stopped appearing, as though the draw had swallowed the man whole, or as though he had decided at last that the ridge had given enough of itself and it was time to go. Oravith did not know which. He was not certain it mattered. Final tally: Ridgeline Thorn approaches to Firebase Crescent, Day 6. Personnel engaged from Vethrak 7th Rifle Company and attached reinforcements. 26 total across 3 contacts. Friendly casualties: 11 dead, 7 wounded, 2 critical. Enemy casualties: 1 confirmed human combatant, wounded in the first contact and carrying that wound through 2 subsequent engagements over approximately 3 hours of active terrain against escalating force concentrations. His current status is unknown. Annotation: Oravith has been a soldier for 14 years. He has engaged mired and heavy infantry, quorum assault units, 2 breeds of Sarath Territorial Defense Forces, and a coalition human rifle company in the border dispute of cycle year 33, among others. He knows what a superior combatant looks like. He also knows what a soldier who has decided something looks like. These are not the same thing. What took place on Ridgeline Thorn was not the performance of a superior combatant in any technical sense. The marksmanship was exceptional. The tactical positioning was exceptional. But there are Vethrak soldiers with equivalent skills. What that young man had, and what Oravith has never encountered in any species he has engaged, was the apparent absence of a ceiling. Every soldier has a ceiling. It is different for each individual, but it exists. There is a point at which the accumulation of damage, exhaustion, isolation, and the loss of support becomes operationally decisive, not because the soldier chooses to stop, but because the body and mind register that continuation is no longer physically possible and begin to close down in sequence. It is not failure. It is physiology. Every species Oravith has encountered has this ceiling. It is how attrition works. It is the foundational assumption of every doctrine of sustained combat ever written. The human on Ridgeline Thorn appeared not to have one. The record will carry one question forward to whoever reviews it at command level. If this is what one human looks like at a threshold the Vethrak cannot locate, what exactly does the attrition doctrine assume it is fighting? That is all the record contains. Line Sergeant Dak Oravith, Badge 7 Chalk 14. Ridgeline Thorn, Firebase Crescent approaches. End of record.